I'm Larry Mantey. Welcome back to Jersey Matters. Governor Chris Christie is running for president, but how is he doing in New Jersey? And do people here think he would make a good president? With the answer to that and other questions, Tim Tracey is here, who is a research associate with the Monmouth University Polling Institute. Thanks so much for being here, Tim. You just did the poll. You asked some of the questions I asked. How's he doing?
Well, our recent round of polling indicates that just 36% of New Jerseyans approve of the job that Chris Christie's doing as governor.
And how many disapprove?
The disapproval rating, again, it's upside down. It's in the 50s. About 56, 58% of the people would disapprove of the job that Governor Christie's doing here in the state.
And how is that compared to recent polls with him? Does it continue to go down, or is it leveled off?
Governor Christie reached his heights in his approval rating in the aftermath of Superstorm Sandy, with his approval rating reaching into the 70s. A lot of pollsters around the state, kind of thought that these numbers were inflated because of Superstorm Sandy, and these numbers have had a precipitous drop ever since the Bridgegate scandal broke in 2013, early 2014. Lately, it's been holding steady. There's been some minor changes in his approval and disapproval rating, but for the most part, it's been on the negative side of things.
But holding
lately.
Steady is bad if it's bad.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
It hasn't improved. So I guess you can say it hasn't gotten any worse for the most part. But when you're in the mid and low 30s, there's not much positive that you can take away from that.
You also asked the question, would he make a good president? Mm-hmm. And what was the answer?
A strong majority of New Jerseyans don't think that he would make a good president. I believe it was 69% said that they did not believe that Governor Christie would make a good president, including a large majority of Democrats and a majority of independents. It was just, his Republican followers that gave him, where a majority thought he would make a good president.
Did you poll him against other candidates?
Not in this state poll particularly that we're talking about. We did poll him against other candidates. So he loses a head-to-head matchup with registered voters against Hillary Clinton by, I think it's a 40-something to 32%, I think, for Christie. What's interesting,
Which is interesting because Hillary Clinton's not doing all that well right now either. Mm-hmm. In some of the polls. She's starting to slide, so she's got some negatives, but still 15 points ahead.
Yeah, and New Jersey, is a traditionally blue state, especially for federal elections. New Jersey hasn't elected a Republican senator from the state since the 70s and has gone, Democratic in the last several presidential elections. So that's not a huge surprise. But what is more surprising is Christie. When we asked Christie who would make a better president against a few other candidates, Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, Jeb Bush, the former governor from Florida, as well as Scott Walker, who's the current governor of Wisconsin. Chris Christie draws even with Scott Walker, but loses to both Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio when asked who would make a better president among registered voters. So again, he's losing to Clinton. He's not doing well against Bush or Rubio, and barely draws even, draws even with Scott Walker. So his numbers aren't looking too great in terms of his prospects in his home state. Now, obviously, that's different from what the numbers indicate nationally. But that seems to be
not
the
far
state
off
of things.
From nationally, though. I think he'd probably do better among Republicans because that's all that's important right now in the primaries.
I should note that against those head-to-head candidates, obviously Chris Christie, he's winning against Hillary Clinton among Republicans and does better among Republicans against Scott Walker, against Marco Rubio, and against Jeb Bush. So he's beating those other candidates when we're just talking about just those Republican voters. So.
Oh, that's fascinating. So against Jeb Bush, he wins in New Jersey.
He is winning in New Jersey against Marco Rubio and against Scott Walker too.
So if he were to make it to the New Jersey primary through this process, he might do well.
And that's a big question, whether or not he actually makes it to the New Jersey primary, because that's a little bit longer down the road. It seems, and what I think a lot of observers are noticing is that Chris Christie is really putting a lot of eggs in his basket in New Hampshire. It's kind of his make or break stop, trying to kind of repeat what John McCain did in 2008, where he was lacking in money and kind of his campaign was faltering a bit. He ended up winning the primary in New Hampshire in 2008 and then vaulted him up. He was able to get the Republican nomination.
Plus, Christie's not going to win Iowa, just because of the makeup of the Republican base in Iowa.
It is a much different base in Iowa than it is in New Hampshire. And he's polling pretty badly in Iowa. Not much better in New Hampshire, but he is doing slightly better in New Hampshire. But yeah, I think he's focusing a lot of his time and a lot of his resources on New Hampshire, kind of that make or break moment. And his style of retail politics does play well with voters in New Hampshire, especially that town hall circuit where he was most of the week last week after he announced that he was
To
running
your
for
point,
president.
I was talking to another pollster last week, and I was talking about the New Jersey numbers and the national numbers, and he said to me, forget the national numbers, forget the New Jersey numbers. The only thing that matters right now is how well Chris Christie's doing in New Hampshire. If he doesn't do well in New Hampshire, his campaign's over. So you don't really have to worry about any of the other numbers.
Exactly. I mean, it's really hard to see how Chris Christie's campaign can continue after a really terrible performance in New Hampshire. He needs to do well in New Hampshire to convince these donors and people that are financing his campaign or making contributions to his campaign that he's a viable candidate, and then he continue going forward. So
thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming over. I appreciate it. Tim Tracey, research associate at the Monmouth University Polling Institute. And that wraps up Jersey Matters. Stick around for another thing.